Animaniacs issue 46. Pinky says he's got a bubblegum flavored food pellet and blows bubbles, but he somehow says they're his. Brain says he's made an invention Pinky mistakes for a hairdryer, again, that makes the one who used it become susceptible to his orders. And he plans on being not just a hairstylist, but a celebrity hairstylist. The only reason he'd get hired is for the sheer novelty value of having a talking mouse around. Because he has no work experience or education. Lucky for Pinky, he enjoys himself while hanging from the ceiling by some gum, saying he's a skydiver. Brain plans to open his own salon. How does he plan to do that with no established credibility? I guess he has money from a past scheme, but he's not qualified. He says his salon will attract celebrities, and many of them are friends of the president, so he wants to program them to recommend him to be his hairdresser. Pinky bites the gum to get himself free from it, and then someone asks Pinky and Brain what happened to their heads and jokes about it, as if he doesn't recognize the only infamous talking mice. When he's told the truth, he says that as well as a security deposit will get him to space. So it's literally explained that having a talking mouse is why he'll get it. That's good. Pinky shows him that Brain won $1 million in a big lawsuit. Surprisingly, we weren't supposed to assume they sued another tobacco company. Instead, Brain doesn't remember winning a lawsuit, so apparently this takes place before that issue. And Pinky says he doesn't remember because that piano hit him on his head. But the only reason he'd survive that is if either he heals really fast or he has Project Phoenix. Another situation would have him stay in a coma until the lawsuit's won. We know he can heal really fast, so there's no reason he would have a concussion until a lawsuit was won. Brain thanks him as I think that money from a past scheme would have been more believable. Brain tells Celine Dion that he might be willing to update her hairstyle, even though it is up to date. And her head is drawn badly just for a joke for no reason. She says it's been 5 minutes since her last styling, so she'd better do something. But she does actually humor Brain instead of her being sarcastic. This doesn't make sense. Then she asks him if he's sure if he knows what he's doing, which wouldn't make sense if it weren't for the fact that he ran out of his salon to try to get a customer, which of course gives away that he's just starting out running a salon, because it isn't something a normal salon owner would do. Brain says he studied with the masters of mail-order haircutting. Pinky enjoys himself by spinning around holding a chair. And for no reason, Brain tells her what his invention is called as he uses it. As reality ensues because Pinky feels nauseous from spinning. So Celine Dion gets a pink upright spiky hairstyle and she loves it, which is very convenient. Maybe the invention brainwashes people into loving their new hairstyle. There's no reason the actor who plays Barney would show up at the salon in costume. And Pinky says it's Brain's turn to do the laundry. At least he can be assertive with them sometimes. Brain's told that they got a call from the president. It seems unlikely that so many of these people would feel like abandoning their old hairstyle that worked fine for years for any reason. The president has some impossibly dumb dialogue, and Pinky says Brain's fake name is pretentious. The president asks to eat fish sticks with Pinky because he likes him, and Pinky says he'll whip up his homemade tartar sauce out of nowhere. I wonder if that's going to ruin the plan. They stand behind the president, and Brain says he's won his trust. He'd hear that. Brain says it's time to use his invention to become ruler of the world. He'd hear that and take off. Besides, he's literally met the president in the show. Why would he not recognize him or at least comment on him looking like Brain? He's met the president in earlier issues. It must be in a different universe. Pinky says he couldn't find a bowl, so he had to use Brain's invention to mix his tartar sauce, as opposed to simply telling him he can't mix his tartar sauce. Brain yells at him that he was going to put it on his head, and somehow the president thinks he means that he meant to put tartar sauce on his head, even though he was talking about his invention and his plan to rule the world right behind him. And the word neuro in his invention made it obvious what it was meant to do. The president calls him a nut and kicks him out of the plane. Animaniacs issue 48. Brain says he can't come up with a plan, and Pinky gives him confusing advice, supposedly based on what his mother always says, and says he always does what his mother says. He did give his mother intelligence in one of the episodes, so she would be able to keep in contact with him if she had a cell phone. Brain comes up with the dumb idea that if he becomes the ultimate mother, people will do whatever he says. Even though obviously he's not most people's mother, wouldn't look like it, and most people don't blindly obey their mother. And he should know that because when he gave his parents intelligence-boosting backpacks, and they did nothing but nag him, he didn't follow their every order instantly, like to get them some grandchildren. Even Pinky says Brain doesn't look anything like his mother, and asks why it would listen to him as a result. He says he'll wear an elaborate disguise, and Pinky somehow says that his mother did that after he was born, even though his mother was a normal mouse when he was born. Apparently not in this universe. She was also a normal mouse when he was first made to be the way he is. Brain at least explains that he's altered the frequency of his voice to compel everyone to do as he says. If it was that easy, he'd have already taken over the world. If he could have this be the case thanks to a thing he'd always wear in his clothes. And as I expected, Brain's got a paper-thin disguise when you'd expect him to know better. He wouldn't call it an elaborate disguise then. And he says that after he writes his heartwarming book, people will be lulled into obeying his every order. What are the chances that even more than 100 people would buy and read all of his book? Only the few people who would meet him in person would. Unless they recognize Brain, nobody would believe a talking mouse actually wrote the book, even if he put his photo on it. It cuts ahead in time to someone recommending his book on TV. Apparently he talked to the right people on the street to get this far. After redundant, repetitive panels, where nothing interesting happens, someone interviews Brain calling him a sham, and when Brain tells him the truth, he somehow doesn't believe him and accuses them of not giving a straight answer, even though he looks like a mouse. How is this guy capable of doubting him when everyone else gets brainwashed by his voice? Someone complains that mothers make him do homework, and people start fighting. Brain tells them off, and they stop fighting and people clap for him, and he tells the guy off and gets apologized to. I can't help but like this because of how awful Brain's life is. Somehow Pinky calls Brain mother, and that's happened a lot, even though in this panel Brain isn't wearing the brainwashing stuff or the disguise and has the normal text bubble. Brain says he bought a telemarketing company so that people would call his number to get told something recorded in the brainwashing voice. Only the people already brainwashed by him would call it. Brain says the frequency of the voice was worked out to lull people into a state of high suggestibility, and by the time people make their 5th call, they would be prepared to agree to make him their leader. And it's explained why he thinks people would call him at all because people see a commercial starring him, asking them to call him. Brain mostly gives good advice, and Pinky says he wants to talk to Mother. Brain tells him not to interrupt him now. Every time he seems to say "not now" to him, it ruins his plan, and he should know better by now. Pinky says he'll call her himself, and pressing a button freaks out Brain, who yells at Pinky for it and tells him to be quiet while he records his final message. A kid cries because he hears Brain yelling at Pinky, and when Brain goes to the park to meet up with people, the actual mothers of the people go after Brain angrily, and hypocritically say that they're the only ones allowed to yell at their kids. Apparently their teachers and principals don't count. So why weren't the mothers brainwashed into obedience too? He's pretty unlucky that most of them weren't when other people managed to find out about him easily. Animaniacs, issue 49. Brain complains about the king canceling his ball due to attacks from a monster called Grendel because now he can't unleash tiny crabs on him. So this Brain is violent and Pinky puts up with it. That means they're not refraining from violence though to fear that they'll get persecuted for it. So why hasn't he already made ray guns or worse? Instead of sending crabs, he could have used his technology against them. Like a robot army. If he ever replaced the president, he'd need one to fight back the military, or he'd need a way to mass brainwash them in time as they'd be headed for him. And most of his plans, even if they succeeded, wouldn't have a plan for how to deal with the military revolting on him afterwards. Brain says while holding a piece of paper so small that he must have made it, that he'll defeat Grendel, on the condition that the king gives him Denmark. But it's obvious that a king won't follow through with his end of the bargain. Brain says he'll become ruler of the world if he rules Denmark, because Denmark is the world. So in this story he's either insane or he's being sarcastic and thinks Denmark's the only country that matters, because it's the most influential one and very rich in this universe. Pinky's got a good point being afraid of the idea of fighting Grendel, so he's the sensible one, while Brain just stays confident, being more insane than ever, and says Pinky's scared of his nose. So Pinky's a coward in this universe. Apparently he didn't ditch Brain in spite of that because he gets too lonely without him. In fear of the unknown, Pinky says in front of the castle door that he'll take door number 2 because Maid Hall starts with an M like Monty Hall, a modern pop culture thing. And this proves that they're time travelers, or there's modern things around in this universe. Pinky wonders how Brain's going to convince the king he could beat Grendel, and somehow Brain hadn't thought of that and says he'll lie to the king. And then he says Pinky will regale the king with his great deeds. Pinky says he hasn't done anything. Brain blatantly lies, and Pinky asks if they're making stuff up yet. But somehow the king believes Brain anyways. It makes sense if the king only pretended to believe Brain, and it's really just gonna let him get killed as a punishment for lying. It's just that I'd expect someone to call someone out on lying instead, not have the composure to think to do this. The king says he's gonna hide in the basement, Pinky references friends, and Grendel smashes the door and hurts Brain, who says that it looks like they'll need an actual plan. Why didn't he come up with one? He ends up in armor that's as small as he is, which would only make sense if he had the time to go get some he already made and come back. He says his shield will invite the beast to strike it, and reveals that he bought his sword earlier for a lot of money rather than making it. How could he buy a sword small enough for Pinky to carry? Brain hangs from a string around wood with Pinky holding the other end of it. And because of this, he's high up enough that the monster hits his shield because he can't see it behind the wood. Brain tells Pinky to pull him up, so predictably, he fails him by somehow deciding to let go of the string first to spit on his hands. So Brain gets dropped into molasses, he apologizes for it, and Pinky grabs the rope to try to pull him out. Because he used too much spit, it slips out of his hands. How did Pinky end up in the molasses? The pile of molasses wasn't nearly as big last time. The monster steps on them, and that doesn't kill them because they can heal really fast. And somehow, despite being in pain and in danger, Brain has the composure to not only remember Pinky's inexplicable question from earlier, but to care enough to give him the answer for it that he should have known anyways. He's doing this because it was the running gag in the sequel series to Pinky and the Brain that shall not be named. Pinky says they should run away, but he should know they can't leave the spots because of the molasses. Brain doesn't even point that out somehow. The monster steps on them again, and the molasses has them stuck to his foot. Pinky's somehow brave enough to cheerfully make a pun at their expense. The monster moves his foot a lot trying to shake them off it and smacks it into the wall, creating a hole and leaves the place. The king sees the monster in pain and somehow decides to make Brain the king anyways. He must have only stayed in his job so long because people wanted him to, because he could have abdicated by now if he hates his job. The monster scares the king, and it turns out the monster brought his mother along, who gets mad at Brain and chases him away, ending the story. This story by Bill Matheny is about Brain using a brainwashing hairdryer for his own salon, but all it does is cause people to recommend his salon to other people. Presumably because if it brainwashed people into recommending Brain as the world's leader, that'd be suspicious and cause a panic against him. It doesn't matter how popular his salon got, it's still confusing that the president would go there to get his hair styled when he was fine with his old hairstyle for years, and most people wouldn't go for a drastic change in hair just because they were told to. But anyways, the way his plan got ruined came out of nowhere, because Pinky was never established to be the type to make tartar sauce, and if anything, he's been established as a terrible cook. And the president could have easily not asked to eat fish sticks with him. So the reason for his failure had to come out of nowhere because the plan was too good. For once having nothing wrong with this logic, other than the fact that, of course, The president isn't the absolute ruler, so even if he was brainwashed to say to give Brain his job, Congress would veto that. Brain's plans always forget this. The next story is too annoying for me to stand, because it is Brain and Pinky singing and rhyming for the whole plot. That was a terrible idea, so the issue shouldn't be given too much attention. This story by Joe Edkin is about Brain disguising himself as an old woman in a paper-thin disguise, but thankfully it's explained that he's using a brainwashing voice modulator disguised as a pin on his dress, and that's why everyone who hears him ends up being brainwashed to obey him. That was easy. But somehow there's suddenly a rule where he can't just tell people to make him the ruler right away, and instead he thinks he has to write a book posing as a mother figure and then air a commercial asking the few people seeing it to call him and hear automated messages 5 times. So somehow, this buys Pinky enough time to stop his plan because he presses a button to try to get a message from him when he's in the same room as him, when he should know that you have to call the number with a phone and not press a button to get that result. So him making this mistake would only make sense if he was trying to sabotage his plan on purpose. Or he somehow thought pressing a button would cause Brain to humor him after all, even after he said not now, and say a message like he's mother. The confusing thing is that even he was calling him mother, even when Brain wasn't in that mother disguise. So how is he not brainwashed into total obedience if he was brainwashed into thinking he was his mother, even after Brain told him he wasn't his mother repeatedly, and so telling him that doesn't work? His plan was unusually good. It would have bypassed Congress entirely if they were brainwashed enough. If only his brainwashing wasn't unusually weak for no reason. This story by Jeff Seuss, or Sue-S, was about Brain trying to become a king by saying he'll defeat a monster in exchange for the throne, even though the king could get away with not holding up his end of the bargain, and Brain's just a tiny mouse who somehow had no plan to defeat the monster and brought nothing with him to do so. Pinky somehow decided to let go of the rope Brain was hanging from in front of the monster because he somehow thought spitting on his hands would be a good idea. It'd make more sense if he did this on purpose because he hurt him earlier. He drops him in molasses, and the monster steps on them, which would only happen if he did it out of spite. Then they stick to his foot, and he kicks the wall and runs away hurt from it. We have to assume that the reason Brain and Pinky survived is that they can heal really fast. And they end up chased away by a bigger threat because it turns out that thing still had a mother around. In general, Brain was the stupid one, and Pinky was the sensible one. Brain had a reckless and delusional idea with no plan on how to beat the monster, while Pinky said the monster could be scary. I'm glad this story is nothing like the version of Beowulf I saw in that later Sabrina story.